They don't fire missiles, they don't invade islands, they don't even make headlines, but they're doing something just as dangerous. They're cutting the cords that hold the world together. Undersea cables, those slender lifelines that carry 95% of the world's internet and $10 trillion in daily financial flows, are being tampered with. And nowhere is this threat more urgent than in the Taiwan Strait. In recent months, fishing trawlers with murky ownership and shady routes have damaged Taiwan's communication cables again and again. Crews with links to the Chinese state. Some call it lawfare, others call it grey zone warfare. But let's be clear, this isn't just about internet outages, it's about strategic rehearsal. It's about normalizing sabotage, and it's about testing how far China can go before anyone pushes back. So as Washington talks deterrence and Beijing sharpens its playbook, we ask, has the war for Taiwan already begun below the surface? Hello and welcome. You're watching Statecraft with me, Geeta Mohan. In January of this year, a vessel named Xingxun 39, flying the Tanzanian flag but manned by a Chinese crew. They disabled its tracking system as it dragged anchor over a vital undersea cable, snapping Taiwan's link to the outside world. Just days later, Taiwan's Coast Guard intercepted another vessel, Mongolian flagged but Chinese in name, attempting what looked like a similar maneuver. Investigators discovered the vessel's history, a maze of ownership changes, flag swaps, and deceptive paperwork, tactics designed to obscure its true allegiance. And behind them all, a single pattern begins to emerge: deliberate, persistent, precise. Beijing insists that these are maritime accidents, but experts and military planners see something more sinister: an evolving form of hybrid warfare known as civil exploitation lawfare.
I think this is symbolic of a broader review of just how fragile and vulnerable our infrastructure is relating to submarine cables. We are reliant on cables that are literally the size of a garden hose for so much, and this signals that we need to do something in order to make sure that China, which has in multiple cases in the past disrupted Taiwan's cables, aren't as easily able to do so in the future. And so this is perhaps a microcosm of a bigger problem where we see cable cutting in the Red Sea, in the Baltic Sea, and elsewhere, and we're trying to come to terms with how best to approach it, because right now we have a limited number of tools for protecting them, and we have a limited number of tools legally for what we can do outside of our own territorial waters.
Undersea fiber optic cables carry over 95% of international internet and data traffic. From global banking to military intelligence, nearly every byte of digital information traverses these deep-sea lifelines. Taiwan sits at the heart of this web, connected to 14 international cables, many of which link Asia to the United States and beyond. Any disruption to this network has consequences far beyond Taipei, threatening regional stability and global economy. Now imagine this: in the opening hours of a conflict in the Taiwan Strait, these undersea cables go dark, severed not by missiles, but by disguised vessels lurking under the legal cover of civilian activity. Command and control systems would falter, markets would panic, and the world might face a crisis with one of its most important economies cut off, digitally isolated in a moment of strategic vulnerability. So how is China hiding in plain sight? It starts with a fleet, not of warships, but of shadows. China's shadow fleet, a loosely linked network of vessels disguised as fishing boats, dredgers, and cargo ships. It is central to this grey zone strategy. These ships often deactivate their automatic identification systems, avoid official ports, and frequently change names and flags.
The gray zone is conceptually the space between peace and war. We all can feel that the maritime domain, particularly in critical places like around Taiwan and the South China Sea, are a bit more conflictual than peaceful, but aren't quite to the level of war. So these tactics are used in order to create doubt and uncertainty and cause a disruption to our normal thinking process. Now, what China has done very successfully is attack critical infrastructure in subtle ways. Now, submarine cable infrastructure is a particularly vulnerable piece of material. It is so easily disrupted that even sharks in the past have been able to bite cables and cause disruption. And so this is kind of low-hanging fruit for attempting to cause uncertainty and instability. If China is looking in some ways to advance through a sort of non-aggressive or directly aggressive hostile means, this is a very good way to do so because it cuts people off, it slows down internet, and it diminishes the ability to engage in transactions. $10 trillion of economic activity go through those cables every single day. And so any kind of disruption, particularly at scale, causes all kinds of economic hardship and logistical nightmares.
Many are registered in nations with limited maritime enforcement capabilities, so-called flags of convenience, from Mongolia to Tanzania. Their ownership is buried under shell companies and front corporations. At sea, they vanish into the congestion of the Taiwan Strait, blending in with thousands of legitimate vessels. In that crowded chaos, sabotage can masquerade as misfortune. But this is no accident. Since February 2023, at least 100 suspected shadow vessels have been tracked near Taiwan. Incidents are increasing, often near known cable routes. Each disruption offers China insights: how fast Taiwan responds, what backup systems are used, and how allies like the US react. International law, meanwhile, struggles to keep up. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, the country where a vessel is registered, the so-called flag state, holds primary legal jurisdiction. But what happens when that flag belongs to a failed regulator or a willing accomplice?
Well, the number one concern in the world when it comes to China and Taiwan today is China's ability to disrupt global internet flows by cutting internet cables on the seafloor. Now, there is something like 1.2 million kilometers of cables on the seafloor, on which 95% of the world's internet traffic moves. But we're looking specifically at the China-Taiwan theater, and in recent months, China has made several attempts to disrupt Taiwan's internet traffic by cutting cables on the seafloor. There's been a Chinese ship captain that's been captured by the Taiwanese, and they plan to sentence him for disrupting Taiwan's cable traffic. There have been instances in the past when China has unveiled specialist vessels which can actually cut cables on the seafloor. These are vessels that carry deep cable cutters. There are machines that go down to 4 kilometers. They're armed with high-speed saws that move at some 1600 RPM, diamond-tipped saws. So this is the kind of specialist equipment that China has been unveiling in the last couple of months. These specialist ships, equipment, displaying its ability to disrupt internet traffic on the seafloor, and that's one of the reasons why the United States has now moved a bipartisan bill in the Senate to try and control China's ability to do that, because once China does this, it weaponizes the ability to disrupt internet traffic. The other nations could follow suit. There are reports of the Russian Federation doing the same. In the Baltic, there have been disruptions of internet seabed cables in the Baltic as well. So this is one big area of concern. Now, the attempt now in the Western world seems to be to join up, team up, and try and find a way of deterring China from cutting cables on the seabed. In a way, this move would be like what happened in the height of the Cold War, when you had several treaties that kept weapons away from space. That the militarization of space was a big concern, and that there were several treaties to ensure that no countries put weapons in space. Now, with the fact that the entire world depends on internet traffic traveling through the seabed, the aim is to ensure that countries like China cannot disrupt the global commons, which is the internet.
Even the 1884 Submarine Cable Convention, one of the oldest international treaties still in force, allows for foreign navies to inspect suspected saboteurs. But only 36 nations, not including China, have ratified it. And without enforcement, lawfare, the strategic use of legal ambiguity, thrives. Taiwan is responding. It has upgraded security protocols, enhanced interagency coordination, and deployed automatic cable warning systems. Its Coast Guard is ramping up inspections. But the threat lies beyond Taiwan's territorial waters, in a legal grey zone where China's shadow fleet operates with impunity. So what can the United States do? Quite a lot, if it acts now, decisively, and with allies. The first step, deterrence.
Every country on Earth should have a well-understood, visible, at least partially, submarine cable resilience plan. Now, parts of it need to be secret, needs to be classified for obvious reasons. This is incredibly sensitive. And so we want to make sure that there are at least enough pieces of information in the public domain that everybody recognizes that something's being done. But we need to be very careful in how we approach it, because bad actors can start targeting this, and we are seeing that more and more.
The US must treat undersea cable security as a strategic priority, not just for Taiwan, but for global infrastructure stability. Here's what a comprehensive US response could look like. Build a maritime security coalition. Working through frameworks like the New York Statement and the Quad Partnership, Washington can lead a coalition to patrol cable routes, share intelligence, and expose shadow fleet operations. The new G7 Shadow Fleet Task Force could be a model, enhanced with AI tools to track suspicious vessel behavior as already done in the Baltic Sea to counter Russian grey zone actions. Close legal gaps. Through the International Maritime Organization and the Tokyo MOU, the US should advocate stricter norms against vessel obfuscation, while pushing for Taiwan's inclusion even as an observer in key regulatory platforms. Maximize transparency. US agencies can publish lists of shadow vessels, warn shipping firms, and expose insurers underwriting illicit operations. Naming and shaming works even on the high seas. The US can also apply diplomatic pressure. Countries that lend their flags to suspicious ships must face a choice: comply with maritime law or risk sanctions. The island nation of Palau already deregistered 3 Russian vessels. Others can follow. Harden Taiwan's maritime security. Through its Coast Guard cooperation, Washington can assist Taiwan in tracking ship-to-ship transfers, enforcing maritime zones, and improving domain awareness. And finally, turn law into leverage. Partner states like Palau, a friend to both the US and Taiwan, could bring legal cases against China in international courts, citing UNCLOS violations. The US can back them with evidence and expertise. Even legal action by private cable operators, supported by third-party litigation funding, could pressure the shell companies behind the shadow fleet. And if sabotage hits US-connected infrastructure like the Asia-America Gateway, American courts could assert criminal jurisdiction. Crew members could even be flipped for intelligence.
So this is indeed very important because China want to win the war and occupy Taiwan or annex it Taiwan without the war. Yeah, or of course, this is the best way because strategy of Suntas, traditional advisor, but manual they made. China like this idea anyway as a manual, but in cutting the cable, it's directly linked with it. Because you can imagine people in Taiwan cut communication with other country. In this case, even if some government still keep the link with other countries, but common people cannot get access to the internet with the other country, or they cannot communicate with people in the other country. They are afraid. They are afraid the situation they are losing war with China. So China cut the cable and contain the Taiwan and blockade Taiwan and making the message you are losing. So resistance is meaningless.
But there's a risk in waiting too long. In a real conflict scenario, China might launch simultaneous undersea cable attacks, paralyzing communications, disrupting command networks, and isolating Taiwan within the first hours. This aligns with China's doctrine of systems destruction warfare, aiming not just to win battles but to blind and confuse its adversaries before the fight even begins. Beijing is preparing. It has already tested deep-sea cable-cutting drones, run cable repair drills near Taiwan, and hardened its own subsea networks. And for all the warnings, China isn't hiding it. State media now openly discusses defending its own cables, while denying any role in severing others. The message is clear. They're watching the global reaction and calibrating the next move.
台湾是中国的一部分，根本不存在什么海峡中线。有关航线的设立和启用，是主管部门根据民航发展管理需要开展的一项常规工作，对两岸同胞都有利。民进党当局为一党之私，借此渲染所谓大陆军事威胁，妄图制造安全焦虑，升高对立对抗，阻挠两岸交流，不得人心，不会得逞。
In this new era of great power competition, undersea cables aren't just infrastructure, they're targets. Civilian vessels aren't always innocent, and maritime dominance doesn't just come from military strength, it comes from industrial capacity. That's why the fight isn't only out at sea, it's back home too, in shipyards, dry docks, and on Capitol Hill. The Ships for America Act may be Washington's wake-up call, a bill to rebuild the US-flagged fleet, appoint a national maritime security advisor, and counter China's dominance in shipbuilding and shipping. It's framed as national security because it is. Because if the US can't build, it can't protect. If it can't patrol, it can't deter. And if it doesn't lead, others will.
Well, this bill signals a desire to support Taiwan in protecting itself against one of the greatest threats to its continuity. Submarine cables provide 99% of the telephonic and internet communication that we rely on today. And cutting that off means cutting us off from the entire world. So many systems would go down, from cash and ATM points to all the systems that we rely on for defense and security, all the way just to basic communication. So the need for those cables to be intact is absolutely critical, and this bill affords an opportunity for the US government to provide additional support and be creative in how it helps protect Taiwan's resilience against any kind of interaction with those cables that China might try to interfere and cause disruption.
Undersea cables are more than tubes of glass. They are the arteries of civilization, invisible yet indispensable. To protect them, the world must see clearly through the fog of legal ambiguity and act with unity, clarity, and speed. Because in this silent war beneath the sea, what's at stake is not just Taiwan's resilience, but the stability of the digital world itself. China is shaping a battlefield most people can't see, beneath the waves. This is a new kind of warfare, where civilian masks hide military intent. And the question isn't whether the US and its allies can respond. It's whether they're willing to act before the damage is done. Because by the time the cables go dark, it won't be a warning shot. It'll be too late. Thank you for watching Statecraft.